She had no reason to stop, no bread to buy, no nails to replace, no errands worth the dust in her horse's breath. But when the wind shifted sharp and cold, like it carried a whisper meant for her alone, Martha Langley drew the reins and turned toward the square. That's when she saw them. Three boys stood in a row, motionless, hands bound behind their backs, burlap sacks knotted over their heads. A crude hand-painted sign leaned against the post beside them. Orphans, three apiece. The crowd barely looked at them. They were a curiosity, not children. Martha stepped down from her wagon, her black skirts brushing the dirt like the shadow of a gallows rope. People noticed her now, the widow who never stayed for gossip or prayer meetings, cutting straight through to the post like she owned the ground under her boots. The auctioneer, red-faced and sweating through his shirt, straightened when he saw her. "Ma'am," he called, "you here for one?" She didn't answer. The tallest boy swayed, knees buckling before he caught himself. The other two stood as still as fence posts. The auctioneer scratched at his neck. $3 each. Ain't house trained, don't cry, don't talk much. Orders from the cellar sacks, stay on till bought. Still nothing from her. Finally, she reached into her coat, drew a worn leather purse, and pressed $6 into his palm. "All three," she said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man hesitated. Then, muttering, he cut the ropes. The sacks fell, pale blue eyes in a gaunt face, a bruise under another's eye, and the smallest, no more than 6, looked straight at her. "Mrs. Langley," he whispered, not afraid, not guessing, certain. Martha's jaw tightened. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come with me," she said. They rode from town in silence. The wagon wheels groaned over the ruts, and the boys sat huddled in the back, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the road behind them as though afraid the square might come chasing. Martha kept her gaze forward, reins loose in her hands. She knew better than to speak. Comfort offered too soon could be a strange kind of cruelty. Her farm lay at the edge of a pine valley, where the creek ran quick and the air always carried a hint of resin. The fields had gone to seed long ago. The barn leaned under its own weight, and the windows of the house wore a film of neglect, but the place stood, and it was hers. The eldest boy, tall for his age, shoulders already narrowing into the shape of a man, jumped down first when they arrived. He helped the others without a word. Inside, the stove still held a faint warmth from the morning. Martha set a kettle on and pulled flour and beans from the cupboard. "Sit," she said. The smallest hesitated before answering her earlier question. "Milo," he whispered. The middle boy kept his eyes down. "Harris." The eldest's voice was steady but guarded. "Beck." When the batter hissed in the pan, she asked the question that had lodged itself like a splinter since the square. "You said my name, Milo? How?" He shrugged. "Just knew." "Did someone tell you?" "No." "Did we meet before?" Another shake of the head. Then, almost too quiet to catch, "A lady said it. While I was sleeping. She said, 'Martha Langley will come. She'll take you home.'" The pan sizzled. Beck stiffened. Harris studied the floor. Martha kept her eyes on the batter, but something inside her shifted. Those were words she'd whispered only once into the dirt of her husband's grave years ago. "Let someone need me again. Let someone say my name." When the pancakes were ready, she fed them. They ate like wolves, the scrape of forks the only sound. Afterwards, she laid blankets near the hearth. "You sleep here. Clean clothes are in the chest. If you run, I won't follow, but the lantern will be lit till morning." She turned for the stairs, then paused. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what happens next." But none of them slept, not the boys, and not her. Morning crept in without sunlight, the clouds hanging low, as if the sky itself had kept watch. Martha was already dressed and stoking the fire, when the boys stirred. Milo was curled nearest the hearth, thumb pressed gently against his lip, not sucking, just holding it there like an anchor. Harris lay flat on his back, fists clenched over his chest. Beck sat upright in the far corner, eyes fixed on the door. Martha set folded shirts and wool trousers on the bench. Barnes got water and privacy, towels in the red box. Beck first, then Harris, then Milo. Don't come back in until you're clean. Beck's jaw tightened. Why are you doing this? Because I want to. People don't just do things to be kind. That's because they forget how much kindness costs. He said nothing, but after a pause, took the clothes and stepped outside. Harris followed minutes later. Milo lingered in the doorway, small shoulders hunched. Can I keep my name? Her head turned. Why wouldn't you? People change them when they take you in. I won't. Good, 'cause I think God gave it to me. The corners of her mouth softened. Go on then. By the time they returned, hair damp, cheeks scrubbed raw from cold water, the table was set with steaming bowls of oatmeal, sliced apples, and a dusting of cinnamon Martha had saved for years. Beck didn't sit until she gestured. Harris ate quietly, each motion precise, like someone afraid of spilling. Milo devoured his share, then grinned when she slipped him a second apple slice. It wasn't perfect. Beck stayed outside most of the afternoon, fixing a crooked fence post without being asked. Harris stacked wood in neat rows, but flinched when she stepped too close. Milo followed her everywhere, sweeping, humming half-remembered hymns. Still by nightfall, there was a faint warmth in the air, not from the fire, but from the way they were beginning, just barely, to belong. The knock came after sunset. 3 sharp raps. Martha froze. The boys looked up, tense as deer. She opened the door to find Reverend Jacob Stokes on the porch, his black coat heavy with dust. Heard you made a purchase in town, he said. I brought them home. Wasn't sure it was you. Folks think you've gone mad. Those boys, they don't stay anywhere long. Then I'll make them want to. He studied her for a long moment. Taking in one's hard enough. 3's a resurrection. She said nothing. But inside, Milo whispered to Harris, he's scared of what might happen to us. So am I, Harris murmured. Snow fell overnight, soft at first, then heavy enough to hide the hills. By morning, the world outside was white and still. The boys crowded near the window, Milo pressing his nose to the glass, Harris standing back with arms folded, Beck watching without comment. Cold as the devil's handshake, Martha said, setting down a tray of biscuits. Milo spun toward her. Can we touch it? Boots on first, or your toes will snap clean off. An hour later, the yard echoed with laughter. Milo darted between Beck and Harris as they rolled a crooked snowman. Beck teased about giving it Harris's hat. Harris deadpanned that it didn't need ears. Martha watched from the porch, tea warming her hands. It had been years since children's voices carried across that yard, years since she'd let herself imagine it might happen again. By sundown, they were soaked and grinning. She made stew, hung their wet clothes by the fire, and dealt the first hand of cards. They played until they fell asleep in a tangled heap of limbs on the floor. 5 days later, trouble came riding. Martha was in town for supplies when Gerald Wash, the storekeeper, leaned across the counter. Man came through asking after the boys. Said he had papers. Didn't give a name. Headed east towards your place. She left the flour and rode hard. Cresting the hill, she saw a strange horse tied out front. Inside, a tall man in a dark coat stood before the boys, a folded sack dangling from his hand. Step away from them, she said. He turned slowly. You must be the widow. I've come for what's mine. He opened a folder ward transfer papers signed by a judge 2 counties over. You paid for flesh, she said, voice cold, not for family. Beck's voice trembled but held. Say that again, and I'll knock your teeth out. The man sneered. Feral dog. Then we bite, Harris said, stepping closer. The man's hand slipped into his coat. Martha moved first. The rifle from the mantel was already in her grip. Try it. His eyes measured her, then he stepped back toward the door. You'll regret this. She didn't lower the gun until the sound of hooves was gone. The boys didn't speak, but that night they slept closer to her chair than the fire. Winter settled deep into the valley, days short and nights long enough to make the lamps burn low before dawn. The boys began to slip into routines, Beck rising early to chop wood without being asked, Harris tending the hens, Milo shadowing Martha like a second heartbeat. It might have lasted that way if not for the letter. No name, no return mark, just a single sheet slid under the door, ink in sharp, deliberate strokes. You stole them. That won't be forgotten. Martha burned it in the stove before the boys saw, but she doubled the locks and kept the rifle loaded. 2 weeks later, a goat was found dead in the yard. Its neck was snapped clean, no struggle, no tracks. Beck buried it near the garden without letting Milo look. On Beck's birthday, a storm rolled in, rattling the shutters. They lit the room with every candle they owned. Milo handed Beck a wooden whistle he'd carved himself. Harris gave him a stitched pouch for nails and tools. Martha brought out a dark wool coat that had belonged to her late husband. I can't take this, Beck murmured. You already have, she replied. The next morning, rain still misting the air, Milo spotted the dog. A yellow-eyed stray, ribs showing, standing just beyond the tree line. Beck stepped outside before she could stop him. The dog bolted into the woods, and then came the sound. Gunfire. 1 shot. Silence. 3 more. Beck dropped flat. Harris yanked Milo from the window. Martha didn't move. She knew that rhythm a warning, then the real threat. They didn't sleep that night. Beck sat with the rifle across his lap, Harris watching the dark through a slit in the curtain. Milo's small hands trembled beneath the blanket. Do you think they'll come in the dark? Harris asked. No, Martha said. Cowards wait for daylight. By the 4th day, food was running low. I can go into town, Beck offered. You're a boy, Martha said. They'd be looking for you. She took the long trail herself, avoiding the main road. It cost her hours each way. When she returned, her face was pale. There's a man in town asking if I live alone, she told them. Sheriff ran him off, but he wasn't working alone. That night she opened a box she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay her husband's revolver, a spare box of cartridges, and a worn map. There's a church-run homestead 3 valleys over, she said. Safe place. If I leave now, I can speak to the pastor by morning. If I'm gone more than 2 days, you stay here and keep the doors locked. We're not letting you go alone, Beck said. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. She left at dusk. But by sunrise, less than 10 miles out, hoofbeats closed in. 3 riders in dust coats surrounded her, guns drawn. Where you headed, miss? The leader asked. Church, she said. You've been harboring boys that don't belong to you. They were dumped like refuse. I gave them a home. You stole from someone who paid good money. Then the system's broken. The man's smile was thin. Maybe it is. Doesn't change the law. Maybe the law's broken too. More riders emerged from the trees, 7 in all. The leader struck her across the face before she could fire. Back at the cabin, the boys waited. 1 day. 2. On the 3rd, Beck stood. She wouldn't leave us. They packed what little they could carry, the second revolver, the map, and the will to bring her home. The trail Martha had planned to take wound through low hills and scrub pine. Halfway along, they found her horse shot through the chest, stiff in the frost. No sign of her except a thin trail of blood leading east. away from town, away from the church. She's alive, Milo said, voice certain. Beck didn't question him. They moved before sunrise, hugging the tree line. Harris found a narrow boot print with a faint drag mark. Woman's step, he murmured, weak but fresh. The track led to a shack hidden in overgrowth, leaning as if the mountain itself had grown tired of holding it up. A torn red scarf fluttered from a nail on the porch. She's here, Milo whispered. Could be a trap, Harris warned. No time, Beck said. Inside, the air reeked of sweat and old smoke. Rope lay coiled on the floor. In the far corner, Martha was tied to a bedpost, wrists raw, eyes half-lidded. She smiled when she saw them. I knew you'd come. Beck cut her loose. Did they hurt you? Not in the way they wanted. They left to get supplies for a buyer. Milo's voice came from the doorway. They're coming. 3 men were climbing the trail. The escape was rough, down a ravine slick with moss, gunfire snapping bark overhead. They reached an old mine shaft just ahead of pursuit. Inside, the damp air clung like cold cloth. Hide in the bend, Beck told her, handing over the revolver. The men entered minutes later. The fight was swift, Beck dropping one with an iron bar, Harris taking another to the ground, and Martha firing the shot that ended the third's advance. Smoke curled from the barrel as her hands shook. You saved us, Beck said. Not yet, she replied. We leave him alive to crawl back with a warning they come again. I aim higher. They slipped out a side shaft and didn't stop until the cabin's chimney was in sight. The mine and its shadows stayed behind them, but the tension followed like an echo. That night none of them slept. The boys huddled close to the fire, the glow painting their faces in amber. Milo's small hand never left Martha's sleeve. Beck sat with his back to the wall, rifle across his knees. Harris kept glancing at the door as if expecting it to splinter under a stranger's boot. They'll come back, Beck said finally. Maybe, Martha answered, but next time we'll be ready. The days that followed were quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that came from watchfulness, not peace. Beck built a second fence around the property. Harris laid traps near the tree line. Martha brought home a large, solemn hound from town, a dog that slept at the foot of her bed and never let the porch sit empty. By late winter, the fear began to loosen its grip. The mine became something they didn't speak of, but all of them felt the invisible weight of what had happened there. When spring arrived, they planted a new garden together. Rows of cabbage and beans stitched the dark soil like careful seams. Martha moved between them with her sleeves rolled, a basket hooked in one arm, humming low under her breath. Milo trotted alongside with a smaller basket, wobbling beneath its weight. Beck and Harris worked by the coop, repairing the roof with steady rhythm. It was the first season in years that felt like it belonged to them. One evening, as the sun sank gold over the ridge, Martha found a folded scrap of paper tucked under her pillow. In a child's uneven letters, it read home. She didn't need to ask who wrote it. The days lengthened, and with them, the sound of life in the cabin. Milo's laughter spilled through open windows. Harris took to reading aloud by the fire in the evenings, stumbling over big words but never quitting. Beck, without being asked, began fixing things. No one else noticed a loose hinge on the porch door, a sag in the chicken coop gate, a shutter that banged in the wind. Martha allowed herself to believe they'd outrun the worst of it. But trouble had a way of circling back. It started with hoofbeats in the yard one gray morning. She opened the door to find a boy no older than Beck, hat too big for his head, boots worn thin. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless miles. You Martha Langley? He asked. I am. He handed her a crumpled telegram. 3 boys taken. Southbound wagon. Crossing river. Auction tomorrow. Need help. Signed simply, C. Beck was on his feet before she'd finished reading. I'll ride. No, she said. I will. You can't. I'm not asking permission, Harris. Saddle both horses. We leave in an hour. By dawn, they were halfway down the ridge. Rain chased them like wolves, the river swollen and red with clay. They found the wagon's tracks on the far bank, deep ruts, iron rims biting into wet earth. They're no more than a day ahead, Martha said. They pressed on without stopping. At dusk, smoke marked the outline of Porter's Mill. Tents clustered along the creek, men with rifles walking the perimeter, a pen of stacked crates in the center. Inside, three boys huddled, one with a limp, another with a sack still hanging from his neck. Martha's breath came slow. We go in quiet. Harris shook his head. We go in loud. From inside his coat, he drew a stick of dynamite. They waited until midnight. Martha moved first, walking through the camp like she belonged there, each step unhurried, daring someone to stop her. The boys in the pen spotted her and froze. She pressed a finger to her lips, then cut the wire with a steady hand. Harris lit the fuse behind a stack of crates. Beck charged in from the far side on horseback, scattering men from their posts. The blast was sharp, but enough tents collapsed, shouts rose, the air turned to chaos. Martha pulled the boys free and ran for the horses. Beck wheeled his mount to shield them as they mounted up. No one chased them far. By the time gunfire rang, they were already swallowed by the dark hills. They rode through the night, reaching the cabin just as the tree in the yard bloomed white against the dawn. The rescued boys slept for 2 days straight. When they woke, they ate until the larder was nearly bare. Weeks later, C himself arrived, a man in a wide hat with a ledger under his arm. Inside were names, ages, and destination. Too many still out there, he said. Martha closed the book softly. Then we keep going. That evening, Beck sat on the porch with the lantern lit. Milo curled against the hound, Harris carving a toy from pine. A new boy, Jonas, leaned against Martha's side. Are you my new family? He asked. Martha didn't hesitate. We're your real one. Overhead, the wind carried the smell of rain, and far off, thunder rolled across the hills. But for the first time in years, no one on that porch feared the storm. The storm broke past midnight, rain whispering against the windows like an old voice, returning to a place it once knew. Inside, the boys slept too deeply to stir even Milo, who could wake at the creak of a floorboard. They were tired, full, and for the first time in years, unafraid. Martha sat by the hearth, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. Beck dozed in a chair near the fire, book slipping from his lap. Harris leaned against the doorway, eyes on the shifting trees. No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath, warmth, and the small sounds of a house alive again. In the bedroom, the newest boys slept. Jonas, Paulie, and Ben, the last one rescued, smallest of all, still woke sometimes in the night, breath hitching from dreams he couldn't name. But earlier, he'd handed her a scrap of paper with one word scrawled in charcoal. Mama. She kept it folded in her apron, close to her heart. They're healing, she whispered. Harris nodded. So are we. A week passed. The yard filled with the noise of boots and laughter. Beck taught the younger ones to fish. Harris carved toys. Milo swore worms made him gag but never refused to bait a hook. Martha tended the garden with Jonas. At her side, the boy asking questions that weren't really questions. You think I'll get taller? You think we'll stay here forever? Her answers were always steady. Yes, and yes. Years later, the tree in the yard stood tall and strong, its blossoms giving way to thick green leaves in summer, then to gold in autumn. Beneath it rested a small marker carved with simple words, for the ones who never made it and the ones who did. The house had grown, 2 more rooms, more windows, more laughter spilling from the porch into the fields. Some of the children arrived with bruises, others with silence, but none stayed that way for long. Martha never turned anyone away. People began calling the place the Boone Light, a name whispered from one wagon to another, from town to town, a promise that somewhere in the hills was a door always open, a table always set, and a woman who would fight to keep you. Sometimes on still evenings she would stand at the edge of the porch and listen to the shouts of the boys in the yard, the thud of boots, the bark of the old hound. She would think of the square on that cold day years ago, of three boys with sacks on their heads, and the smallest one saying her name. And she would know that for every mile of loss behind her, this light, this family was the road ahead.